Hi everyone, welcome to the children's panel that we're hosting. I'm Katie. I go by they, them, and I'm joined by my co-events officer, also called Katie, if you want to
Hello,
introduce.
everyone.
Just a little rundown about what we're doing. So we have the amazing Liz with us, who's going
Hello.
to talk all things children's publishing. So hopefully you're in the right place and you're going to enjoy what we're talking about. We are going to ask a few questions that Katie and I came up with, and then we're going to open the floor to everyone. So then you can put any questions into the Q&A box that's at the bottom. And then Katie's going to have a little quick rundown just about SYP North in general.
So basically, SYP North specialises in all things Northern publishing. Kind of our key aims are getting people either into or ahead if they're in the early stages of their career, which for mine and Katie's part involves organising events like this and getting to hear from lots of speakers who specialise in different topics. And today we're very excited to hear all about children's publishing. So, on that note, Liz, if you could please tell us a little bit about yourself and your career thus far.
Absolutely. So my name is Liz Scott. I'm a freelance children's and YA book publicist. So I work with various different publishers in various different ways. So I work on individual campaigns, publicity campaigns for individual books. I work with particular authors across all of their books, whether it be with one publisher or with various different publishers. Some publishers I work on a retainer basis with, so I'll do a set number of days a week or a month and basically look after all of their publicity needs. So that's often with like small indie publishers who don't have an in-house publicity team. Um, so that's kind of my role, and I'm based in Manchester, so I work completely from home, apart from when I'm out on the road doing events and or on tour with authors, or like visiting publishers for publicity meetings. Um, my kind of route to where I am now is I'll kind of do a bit of a like whistle stop, and then you can ask me about bits that are relevant or not relevant. So I did an English degree, and when I graduated, I kind of knew that I wanted to work in publishing. And for that reason, I applied for jobs in bookshops to get, it's a fairly kind of traditional route into publishing to get a bit of a grounding in the book industry and to learn more generally about the book industry. So after I graduated, I went and worked at Bradford Waterstones. If anybody's been to Bradford Waterstones, the most beautiful bookshop in the country. Um, so I worked at Bradford for a year, and it's going back quite a long time. So back then, there really weren't that many options for publishing jobs outside of London and the Southeast. Um, so I moved from Yorkshire to London, transferred to the High Street Kensington branch of Waterstones, and then from there, like applied for entry-level publishing jobs. So my first job was with Phaidon Press, who are like an art and photography publisher, kind of fine art books, beautiful, like big photography books. And I worked in the sales and marketing department there as a sort of department assistant, doing all the mailings and order forms and sort of all of those entry level roles. And from there, I applied for a marketing executive job at Usborne Publishing. Um, and I wasn't particularly at that point thinking, oh, I really want to work in children's. It was just a kind of a next step, the next roll up. But then when I got to Usborne, I then realised that actually children's publishing was very much where I was supposed to be, and these were my people. And um, yeah, I spent 7 years working in the marketing and publicity department at Usborne. So working on everything from board books through all of those kind of that's not my books that everybody knows, all those big brands like Farmyard Tales, and sticker dolly dressing, all the non-fiction titles, and launched their fiction list as well while I was there. So then worked on all of the fiction up to YA. And then so I worked there for 7 years and then decided that I'd lived in London for quite long enough and decided that I was moving to Manchester. And at that point, I did look at applying for other publishing jobs and other arts jobs, but actually just thought I'm going to give freelancing a go. I've at that point worked in publishing for getting on for 10 years and just thought I've got all of these contacts and all of this knowledge. I'll give freelancing a go. And I've now freelanced for twice as long as I ever worked in-house anywhere. So I've very much kind of been a freelancer for the majority of my publishing career, which gives sort of real variety. It means you work with lots of different publishers who all do things slightly differently and have different contacts and different ways of doing things. So it's always a bit of a kind of learning curve. Yeah, so that's where I am now and a kind of how I got to where I am now in a very quick rundown.
So now you're here with your PR agency. How does your PR agency situate itself within the industry? So how does it differ from typical editorial marketing roles that people usually apply for?
So I'm a freelancer really rather than an agency. So it is just me. And I guess publicity roles really split into three different kinds within publishing. So there's in-house publicity that's usually situated in either a purely publicity department or a publicity and marketing department. Quite often in smaller publishers, those kind of departments are amalgamated into one. So there's in-house publicist roles, there's agency publicity roles. So that will be working at a PR agency who might be specifically a books PR agency. They might be a kind of wider arts PR agency, but they will have lots of publicists who work with publishers on delivering campaigns. So people like that you might have heard of, like Midas, like EDPR, those sort of agencies that have a lot of publicists working for them. And then you have freelance publicists like me who are kind of essentially sole traders doing and work in a similar way, will be sort of drafted into work on a specific campaign or with specific authors. And publicity more generally kind of sits, usually within publicity and marketing departments. Publicity and marketing always work very closely together, and then often with the sales department as well. And look after the campaigns essentially. So everything from pre-publicity, looking at getting the trade on board, all that trade focused publicity where you're aiming at booksellers through publication and then sort of beyond, really, in a nutshell. So that's where my role kind of sits within the industry.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, so you mentioned about like working with indie houses as well as kind of larger ones. I'm wondering how much does that differ when you work between the two? Does it differ quite a lot in how you would approach working with them, or?
It does actually. I guess with indie publishers, because of the name. Because sorry, I'm going to try and I go blurry when I move. This has never happened before. I'll try and sit still. Yes, indies often work with a lot of different freelancers to supplement their staffing because obviously they're much smaller. They don't have the same kind of full-time staff. I work with quite a lot of indies that really vary in size. So from somebody like Guppy Books, who are essentially the publisher, what like one person who then works with like freelance publicists, freelance designers, freelance editors, that have like freelance people selling their foreign rights, like have freelancers at every aspect of the business. So when you've got something like that, I find you have quite a lot of free reign actually, and quite a lot of scope to mold your own campaign and form your own campaign. And because it's such a flat hierarchy, you're very much involved in everything, in every aspect of publicity, and you're coming up with a lot of the ideas, and you can be quite agile. Whereas when you're working with a much bigger in-house team, sometimes the it can be much more prescriptive, I guess. So the campaign's already been decided on in-house sometimes, and you're brought in to deliver it, but the outcomes and the aims of the campaign are kind of already set for you. So you're delivering a campaign that somebody else has designed sometimes. And yeah, you're obviously working with a much bigger team. It can take, I'm generalizing, but it can take longer to get decisions made sometimes because there's that hierarchy that you're working within. And culturally, I guess it's quite different as well. So I have sort of found myself in my freelance career working much more with smaller indies. I just think that's sort of where I fit best, and they're much more suited to my temperament and the way that I work. So I haven't really worked in the past with, say, Penguin Random House or Hachette, but I've worked with like, HarperCollins imprints like Farshore, um, and sort of mid-sized, but I still do work for Usborne, for instance, who are an indie but are a much bigger indie. Um, yeah, so I think one of the benefits, I guess, of freelancing is that you get to pick and choose who you work with and where and what kind of culture you want to work in and where you fit best, which yeah, kind of suits me.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I'm really interested about the idea of like the free reign that you said about before for a campaign. What kind of goes through your mind when you're given that free reign? Like how do you kind of start planning it? Do you already have an idea? Are you like it's already there, like fully formed, or
No, I normally find that things kind of change as they progress. So you've always going to have your sort of parameters to start with. So it's probably easiest for me. It probably would be helpful if I use a specific campaign as an example, maybe. So I worked recently with an indie publisher called One World, who have a children's and YA imprint called Rock the Boat, who I'd never worked with before until last year, and they brought me on to launch a debut YA title called Happy Head by Josh Silver. So Josh is based in Manchester. He's a debut. I'm in Manchester, and the publisher thought that it would be quite helpful for him to have somebody sort of on the ground that could be a support. We could have in-person meetings because they're based in London. Josh is completely new to the industry, so has no experience of the publishing industry at all. So just kind of helping him navigate that kind of new experience of being a debut author. So they already had ideas about what they wanted the campaign to be. They were really excited about the book. It's an excellent book. So obviously they were aiming for quite a few reviews. Josh is part of the LGBTQ plus community, and it has an LGBTQ plus sort of love story at the heart of the book, so they were keen to get press in that area of media. They were quite keen to pitch him for festivals, so there were kind of key points that were already set in the campaign. But then as the campaign went along, it became more apparent to all of us that actually the biggest selling point for the book was Josh himself. So he was really, really personable. He was the biggest advocate for his own work and just really eloquent and sort of really excellent at connecting with people. He's a former actor. And had retrained as a mental health nurse, and there are a lot of mental health storylines running through the book. So he could talk from a really informed viewpoint, and also had very kind of personal mental health challenges that he was very happy to talk about as well. So it became very apparent that actually one of the key elements of the campaign should be getting Josh out and about as much as possible. So doing school visits, doing events, getting him embedded in the sort of Manchester literary scene, making connections with other authors in the Northwest. And all of that sort of became apparent as we were going along. So we were able to be quite agile with the campaign and sort of move our key outcomes as we went along without anybody like getting particularly worried about the direction that things were going in. So yeah, it just gave the opportunity to be a bit more agile with what we were doing. Yeah, while still obviously always having an eye on sales, but also like building an author for the long term. This is a debut who Rock the Boats are really committed to publishing more books from. So really kind of building that profile and as well as being focused on sales. So yeah, I guess that's an example of how it's a bit easier to kind of move things as the campaign develops.
It sounds like there's quite a lot of just like trust involved between you, the publisher, and the author throughout the entire process.
That's so key to everything. Absolutely. Yeah, and that sort of three-way relationship. Yeah, absolutely. Because sometimes I'm working with publishers that I've worked with for a really long time, but authors that I haven't worked with. Occasionally I'm working with authors that I've worked with for years and years who might have moved publisher. So I'm working with a publisher for the first time, but I know the author really well. And quite often, as the publicist on a campaign, you're the sort of linchpin and you're the one that is, yeah, kind of bridging those gaps between everybody and cementing those relationships. And yeah, that's a really intuitive point to make actually. Is it very much is about kind of building that relationship between everyone and being a point of trust.
So from that then, from your previous experience in the publishing industry, so moving away from your PR work and back to before that, when you were hiring, what do you look for in a candidate? Do they need prior experience directly with children's literature and the market, or can they come into it from a different perspective, for instance?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Can bring transferable skills from other industries as well as other areas from publishing. Quite frankly, like all skills are transferable. So when I was when I did work in house and would recruit for the department, I was just always looking for somebody um who was working, who worked, whether it's in a relevant role or not, somebody who can sort of demonstrate a will to work, really. And then on top of that, a sort of demonstrable desire to work in publishing. So obviously everybody that, well, not obviously, most people who want to work in publishing can say, I love reading and I love books, but really being able to demonstrate that in some way. So whether that's running your own book club or like I did working in a bookshop, or whether it's sort of interacting with people in publishing or the book industry on social media, or whether it's going to author events in your local bookshop in your spare time, just making it clear that you do have a genuine interest in books and publishing through any one of those ways is I find is really helpful. Um, and then also having a knowledge of the job or the publishing company that you're applying to. So really kind of whether you're targeting a particular publisher or whether you're, just targeting entry level jobs, once you get to the point of being invited, being lucky enough for being to be invited for an interview, really making sure you've done your research, I think is really vitally important. So, visiting bookshops, looking at what books are on the tables and what the trends are and what booksellers are recommending. Um, Looking at the last big bestseller that the specific publisher that you're going to see, what was their last big bestseller, who were their authors, have you read any of them, are they, where are their big trends, and just making sure that you've got that research and that knowledge about where you're going, I think is vitally important. And none of that comes from having prior experience from working in the industry, but it's all about research, um, and looking at what they're doing, and anybody can do that by going into a bookshop. Um, yeah, so I also, as well as having recruited a long time ago, I have mentored as well, for Children's Books North, who are a network that I co-founded that whose members are publishing professionals, authors and illustrators within children's publishing who live in the north of England. And Children's Books North run a mentor scheme for aspirant people who want to work in publishing who live in the north. So I mentored on that for a couple of years. And one of the mentors actually that I had was somebody who was looking for a career change, had been a teacher. Um, their children were a little bit older. They really wanted to get into publishing. So we talked a lot about the kind of relevant transferable skills in a career change, and identifying what those skills were. Um, and in her case, coming from teaching to publishing, I mean, to children's publishing, there are obviously so many. So that first-hand experience of what children are reading, how they respond to books, and the impacts of reading for pleasure, but then also things like, building a lesson plan is very much like building a campaign plan. So what are your desired outcomes? How are you going to achieve that? How do you engage an audience or a classroom? How do you keep them interested? Um, so yeah, I think from coming from outside the industry really brings a fresh perspective, and there are always transferable skills. Um, yeah, I think that really helps. Sometimes publishing can be a little bit blinkered, and I think yeah, I really value people that have got other experiences coming into the industry because it's all relevant.
I think that's good to know, especially as people kind of, like say, sometimes change roles quite a lot. You can't always plan for what you're going to find out that you like once you're in there either.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and I think as well, so going back slightly, when I worked at Bradford Waterstones, I'd sort of identified that I wanted to work in publishing, but I didn't know the first thing about publishing. Um, I knew, I knew that there were editors, and that's pretty much the only role that I knew about, really. Um, and I wasn't even sure that I wanted to be an editor. And then when I worked at Bradford, and then it was at a time when booksellers had proper autonomy over their section in the bookshop. So I'd meet with sales reps from different publishers. So I learnt about that sales role. And then at Bradford, we had a really strong reputation for author events. So any big authors that were on tour would come to Bradford. Um, and I sort of wangled my way onto the events team. Um, and then quickly clocked that every time a big author came to the bookshop, they had a publicist with them. I was like, that looks like a really great job. So then, kind of had that opportunity to investigate that a bit further. But I think, yeah, there are those high profile roles within publishing, which are often editorial, publicity, marketing. But I think doing a bit of research and finding out about the kind of myriad of other roles that there are, which might be more suited to you. So, maybe if you're good at languages, you'd be great in the rights department, selling foreign rights. Maybe you'd be brilliant in production, or design. Like there are so many different roles that are sometimes overlooked because they're not quite as high profile, but are equally as interesting.
Is it and this is just a side question, but is it funny now going into a bookshop as the kind of publicist and thinking somebody there might be thinking this about my job? Is it like a bit of a switch?
Yes, absolutely. But then every single time I go into a bookshop, I get proper job envy because that time that I spent as a bookseller, particularly in Bradford, with like-minded people, straight out of university, um, like it was just the best time. And bookshops are just, yeah, I mean, I'm talking preaching to the converted. I was like everybody just loves bookshops. So every time I go to a bookshop now with authors, I do get proper job envy. I'm just like, oh God, I wish I was a bookseller. It's so like yeah, I really do. But it is quite funny to think, oh God, that's me now. I'm that publicist with accompanying the author. Yeah.
Mm. And with that same kind of hindsight, I'm wondering about like the kind of leap into freelancing. Was there anything in particular that you can think of that made you feel like really confident in being able to do that specifically?
Um, Being brutally honest, I didn't feel massively confident when I started doing it at all. And it was a little bit of a leap of faith. Thankfully, things have changed quite a lot since then, and are still changing. I mean, there's still a lot to do about kind of making publishing slightly less London centric. But at the time, um, there weren't very many options for publishing jobs in the North. Now there are obviously some of the big name publishers are like moving into regional offices, but there are also so many amazing regional indie publishers that have been doing amazing things for a really long time. But obviously by their very nature, they're quite small, so there are not huge numbers of jobs. Which there are many more now than when I went freelance. So it was sort of a kind of it was it was kind of right, well, I still want to work in publishing. Um, that's what I'm going to have to do. But I knew that I had a lot of contacts. I think particularly in children's publishing, it's quite a small industry and people tend to stay in the industry. So you do get to know quite a few people quite quickly. Even having just worked in-house at Usborne, I knew publicists from other publishing houses. So yeah, there was an element of, well, I do know people and I do have those contacts. Um, so I can kind of make that leap. But it was definitely a case of gaining confidence while doing it, definitely, and kind of blagging it for a little while while I found my feet. Actually, a really great help was there are many more freelancers now. There weren't that many then. But there was one particular freelancer who I can name check, Philippa Perry, who I always think of as a bit of a mentor. Like she was so incredibly supportive and still is, has been throughout my career, kind of a real support. And I think it really helps to have somebody that you can see doing what you want, who is where you want to be, who's a few steps ahead of you, and you can think, oh, that's where I want to be, and that's how to conduct myself if that's where I want to be. And having that sort of person um, to learn from, I think is actually really valuable. I think the many mentor schemes that there are, you guys run an amazing mentor scheme as well, don't you? I just think they're invaluable for that kind of sharing of knowledge and passing on of wisdom. I didn't have a formal mentor scheme, but definitely had that person that I could go, oh yeah, that's how you do it, and that's where I want to be, which was, yeah, really valuable.
With that in mind, you were speaking about obviously how children's publishing or publishing in general is quite London centric and having that mentor there, which kind of really nicely leads into Children's Books North, which you co-founded and have previously spoken about. Could you tell the attendees a little bit more about CBN and your involvement, as well as like why children's publishing in the North specifically is so important?
Um, yes, I can. So I co-founded Children's Books North with Emma Layfield, who at the time was a picture books editorial director at Hachette, and Tilda Johnson, who was a freelance editor. So the three of us were all in the Northwest, and a mutual contact of all of ours actually um, said, you three need to speak to each other because you're all talking to me about the same thing, which is trying to like bring people together a bit more in the North, because um, it felt like very much like if you're in London, you could go to a sort of publishing or book event every night of the week if you wanted to. And it didn't feel like there was an obvious networking place that people could go to in across the north. So there are lots of amazing creatives, authors and illustrators all working. There are lots of amazing networks, places like New Writing North and loads of and Scooby North and you guys and lots of people doing amazing things, but there didn't seem to be that sort of coherent hub of publishing people in the north. And we were focused on the north because that's where we are. So we got together and decided that we would launch Children's Books North for people who live in the north of England and Scotland. And this was at the start of 2020. And our plan at that time was to have networking events, in-person events, where people could all meet up and share that knowledge and just, get together and be supportive. So that kind of creating of a network for people within publishing and networking was one kind of aim, one mission point, and the other was to really try to be champions for regional diversity within publishing and to be real advocates and spokespeople for regional diversity. So we had those kind of two aims, and we had our first in-person networking event at the end of February 2020, which was great. And then that was the last one that we had for like the next 2 years or something, because then obviously everything shut down. So we had to completely change what our aims were and move everything online. And actually, I think it really helped the network because it really focused our attention on the fact that being online meant being much more inclusive and accessible. And obviously, the north of Scotland is a massive place. And if you're like holding socials in Manchester, that is of no use to somebody in the Highlands or even in in Edinburgh is a 3-hour train journey. So it really kind of focused our attention on making sure that the network did exactly what it was supposed to do, and that would be completely inclusive and accessible for everybody. So we held lots of online events and did various kind of pitching events and that kind of thing. Yeah, and the network has just grown massively. So I've stepped away from the sort of day-to-day running of the network. Emma Layfield and Rebecca Mortimer are now the kind of co-leads. Emma is Children's Books North full-time, has left her Hachette job and is really dedicated to building Children's Books North and the things that they do, and has got loads of really exciting ideas about it. I'm still a member, of course, because I work in publishing and I live in Manchester. Yeah, so that's sort of where the network came from. And I think it's particularly important for children's publishing in the North because I go into schools with authors quite frequently. I've seen the huge impact firsthand that it makes when an author goes into a school in their region, and you can see that light bulb moment with the kids that go, "Oh, you're from where I'm from. You sound like I do. You're a real person. This might be an actual job." Like they become not just a name, an abstract name on a book cover. There are actual people who are from where the kids are from, who are talking like them, who are writing about things that they recognize. And it just kind of lights that spark. So yeah, that the kind of the shouting about regional diversity aspect of Children's Books North, I think is vital, and making sure that there are authors and illustrators who can see, and publishing professionals, because it's one thing saying, oh, we need more regional voices and regional authors, but unless you look at every aspect of publishing and you've got people from the North commissioning and designing and at every stage of publishing, then it's not going to be embedded in the culture. So what I forgot what my point was. Sorry, I've completely forgotten what. So making the case for and making it clear to people that in order to work within publishing, you don't have to leave the North, and making it much more possible for people to stay where they're from and work in publishing is the dream. And I think it's becoming much more possible.
Yeah, I definitely believe that. It's definitely becoming a lot more possible. And
Yeah.
the things that CBN do, like all the events, bringing everyone together, is absolutely incredible. It's just seeing everyone, the like-minded people, as you were saying, it's just wonderful. It's like a dream in a way.
Yeah, it's and the thing, one of my favorite things that's come out of it is seeing people making connection in their own locality. So there's groups of illustrators who are popping up who then have gone on outside of Children's Books North, organised events, will have their own little meetups, and that's exactly what the aim was, putting all these people in touch with each other that didn't know that they lived down the road, and then they can like run with that and have their own meetups, and having meetups in Cumbria and meetups in York, and just making that connection and then letting people sort of run with what the network is.
So I feel like we've been rambling for quite a while. So I'm going to open up the Q&A box. And if anyone wants to put anything in, please just go for it. And hopefully Liz will be able to answer.
Hopefully.
And then whilst people are doing that, I will ask one more question just while people are thinking and typing.
Yes.
So there's a lot of trends just in general in publishing, But with children specifically, we've been seeing like graphic novels becoming quite a big thing. Do you see any other trends happening and things like that at the moment? Like,
Yeah, graphic novels, amazing. Like it's really incredible to see actually people really embracing graphic novels. Um, the really interesting thing about that is everybody's on the lookout and wants to get find the next Jamie Smart. Um, and then I've been having really interesting conversations about this. So, Jamie is published by David Fickling, and and Jamie himself, I think, talks a little bit about how he's an overnight success, 15 years in the making. So he's been published by David Fickling for like at least 15 years. And David, being an indie, is one of those people who properly like invests in the long term. And, Jamie Smart the wasn't making the bestseller lists for a long time, but actually they stuck with him and they had a real vision for what they wanted Phoenix Comics to be, and yeah, sort of invested in that long term, and it's paying off now. I just think people should be studying Jamie Smart's career with David Fickling because it's a real kind of success story in investing and sticking with people for the long term and not just always being on the lookout for the next big thing. Ironically, now people are on the lookout for the next big James Smart, but there you go. So yeah, graphic novels. In YA, what trends I think romantasy just still continues. I don't know if you guys went to Yalc this year at all. It's just romantasy, like wall to wall everywhere. So that's still massive, has been for a while. And what else am I seeing? Oh, in middle grade, well, across the board actually, horror. I think people have been saying, oh, horror's the next big thing. It feels like horror really is the next big thing. So I'm seeing quite a lot of yeah, really exciting new people publishing in the kind of yeah, horror and sci-fi area. I've got a really yet to be announced exciting campaign that I'm working on for next year with an author who is based in the North, who has written an utterly terrifying horror book for age 9 to 12. I'm very excited. It's going to be excellent. Yeah, watch this space for
I'm going to
that.
say that's our sign to be focused in.
Yeah, I was about to be like, can we get a free copy of that?
Yeah, well, yeah, proofs are coming soon, guys. Yeah, that's very exciting, and yeah, and that's another one actually. There are quite a lot of freelance children's publicists now, but my USP has been being in the North. So, and because the vast majority of the rest of the children's publicists are in London or the South East, publishers will quite often come to me if they've got an author from the North or if they want to do a tour in the North. I keep saying the North like it's one place. Like I live in Manchester. I'm from West Yorkshire. I'm fully aware that the North is not a place, but it's shorthand,
Community.
isn't it? You know what I mean.
So that did actually answer Alice's question because you're very much on the same wavelength. But I have seen that they put another one in, so I'm going to go straight to that one and then come back up to the top. So are there any specific books or campaigns you're especially proud to have worked on?
Well, the one that I mentioned earlier, actually, Josh Silver's Happy Head. I'm going to blow my own trumpet for a minute. We have annual publicity awards in publishing that are administered by the Publishers Publicity Circle, which is the like industry network for publicists. And this year I won the best YA campaign for Happy Head. So I was very chuffed with that. Thank you. Thank you for me. Yeah, so I was really proud of that. Loved working on that. Yeah, it was just a really it felt quite special. It felt like one of those things where you're in on the ground floor and it's going to go stellar. Like, I think Josh's career is going to be one to watch, and I feel excited to have been there at the start. It was, yeah, that one in particular. And then I am very much looking forward to the one that I can't talk about, because it's not yet been announced, middle grade horror. What else have I worked? That's the same publisher actually, so we should mention another publisher. I absolutely loved working with YA verse novelist Louisa Reed. So Louisa's from Manchester. She's published by Guppy Books, and she writes really incredible verse novels. And I've worked on her last two. So the most recent campaign was for a book called Handle with Care, which is about a teenage pregnancy. It's really about how society can let down the most vulnerable people, and how um people can fall through the cracks and just be let down by the adults around them. Um it is filled with hope. It doesn't have the happiest of endings, but it's, these stories often don't. Um and we've got some really, really amazing reviews. We got so many author endorsements for it because anybody who's read it just is blown away by it. And we've got a number of national reviews for it as well in the national papers. And you might know there are so few opportunities for children's books to be reviewed in the national papers. It's a real kind of scrabble to get any of them. So yeah, getting a few of those sort of national review slots for Handle with Care was really great, but also just helping Louisa to get this really incredible story out and read by lots of teens. Librarians have really got on board with it and are just, yeah, I mean, most of the reviews sort of say anybody who is working with teens and working around teens needs to read this book. So it's just has that kind of weight of endorsement. So that's really fun. And Louisa's great fun as well, and is in Manchester. So yeah, had a great time with her at Yalc and at Cheltenham Literature Festival. Yeah, so that was another exciting one.
Thank you. So next questions, we do have quite a few actually. What would you say are the main transferable skills of a bookseller role?
Transfer, I think it's more about transfer of knowledge, actually. Well, as much skill, I mean, skills in organizing your day and working with the public, and actually work that the skill of being able to interact with many different kinds of people. So working in publishing, you're potentially going to be working with authors, working with your peers, working with editorial directors or managing directors, working with illustrators. And then if you're in children's publishing, you're talking to many different markets. So I guess the way it differs really to adult publishing is and the reader is sometimes not your primary market. They're not the people, like, particularly if it's a young, if it's a picture book or a younger book, the person buying the book is not the end reader. It's a parent or a teacher or a librarian or a carer. So that ability to communicate with lots of different kinds of people, that you also need to master in a bookshop, is really valuable. But I think the thing about being in a bookshop is really trying to leverage those opportunities as much as you possibly can, and really kind of arm yourself with knowledge about the publishing industry. If you're in a bookshop that, if you're lucky enough to work in a bookshop that hosts author events, go to those author events and talk to the people that are coming with the authors, and really just kind of grasp the opportunity with both hands, I think. So I think it's as much about the skills that you have as about the opportunities that arise and the knowledge that you can arm yourself with when you work in a bookshop. Just that kind of working out about how it all works, what the publishing cycles are like when the big books are coming out, um, looking, what the publicists are doing to promote the books to booksellers, because booksellers are another market that we're trying to get on board. Um, yeah, just kind of grasping all of those opportunities, I think.
Yeah. And do you recommend using websites such as Upwork for freelancing for someone to start their publishing career?
Websites such as who, sorry?
Upwork.
Oh gosh, I don't know Upwork, sorry. So I'm also ancient, I should mention that. Um, so yeah, like we should turn the tables and I should ask you guys some stuff because yeah, I don't know about that, sorry.
Well, I think generally then, someone that's looking to go straight into kind of freelancing to begin publishing, how would you suggest they kind of put themselves out there?
That's a tricky one actually, because the that is a tricky one to go straight into freelancing, because so much of freelancing is about having connections and having made connections. Um, I certainly think one of the advantages of being in this generic north that I keep talking about is it's easier to become a big fish in a small pond. So if you're going to industry events in London, you could go to a different event every night of the week and never see the same person twice. Whereas if you're in Manchester or Newcastle or Leeds or any other place, you could go to a handful of book or publishing events and very quickly start to see the same people, start to have those conversations, and other people start to see you as well. And like that kind of importance of networking that we keep coming back to is potentially easier in a place where there are fewer people working in that industry. So from a freelancing point of view, I guess it's you can make those connections much quicker. Um, I can't talk that much about sort of starting freelancing from cold because I'd worked in the industry for 10 years before I started freelancing, and I don't really know how I would have. I think it would have been an even bigger leap of faith to have gone straight into freelancing. Maybe actually working in an agency would be another route into like building contacts quite quickly
Mhm.
in an agency and then making the leap to go it alone. Um, but yeah, keeping an eye on networking, I think.
Yeah. And do you think academic copy editing can transfer well to working in children's publishing or any sector really?
Absolutely. I mean, any experience like that, you've got the eye for detail, you've got a grounding in how publishing works. I think, yeah, absolutely. All of those skills are transferable. And I guess in academic, while the subject matter is completely different, um, the skills and the systems and things are going to be quite similar. And certainly you're going to have that grounding that means you can sort of hit the ground running. I think definitely transferable.
And then I've got a question there as well about any like transferable skills specifically that would catch your eye in an application for children's and YA publishing when you were in like recruitment roles. So I know you mentioned like organisation, planning your day, and networking earlier. Are there any others that would flag?
Event organization, whether that's in, like an HR role, or if you're doing like internal company comms, that kind of thing. Yeah, or organizing events or your like company Christmas party or away days or anything like that. Having an eye to what makes an event work, what the point of an event is. who your market is or your audience, or what outcome you're looking for, that kind of thing. Yeah, and like I mentioned before, teaching anything where you're coming up with a strategy and a plan. So in teaching, you're doing your lesson plans, um, completely transferable to doing a campaign plan. If you're launching any kind of product, you're thinking really carefully about your audience, how to reach them, the different markets. I mean, I just think there are endless ways. I think the way to think about it is to identify, think about what you see the skills are within children's publishing. So a bit of research into children's publishing and the different roles there. And maybe it's reading job descriptions for in job ads and looking at what the skills are, and then thinking strategically about what skills you've got that match those. Yeah, having a grounding of what it is people are looking for.
And just to combine Felicity and Amy's questions, just to confirm that you don't need any kind of specific qualifications for, let's say, like a degree in publishing um, or anything like that to start off with. And Amy also wants to know, is there any advice for trying to break into the industry for a creative or design role? So do you need a qualification to write or illustrate books or anything like that?
No, I don't think you do you, for editorial or design? I really don't. And certainly obviously there are publishing MAs, but I think that's one route into publishing. And it's great for getting a grounding and learning about the different departments and that kind of thing. But it is just one way of breaking into publishing, and it's certainly not the only way. Um, yeah, and gone are the days where you need to have a degree to work in publishing. That's just not a thing. Um, and I think in terms of design or editorial, it's probably more important to, um, or illustration, it's probably more important to build a portfolio of work that can demonstrate what you're doing. So whether you're I think Instagram's quite big for illustrators because obviously it's really visual and you can kind of really build a display of your different skills, or whether it's if you're wanting to break into editorial, even if it's just doing your own writing or magazine editing or university magazine editing, or I think being able to have a portfolio of stuff that you can show is much more important than a qualification.
So we do just have like two more questions. So it's, are you familiar with any volunteer work experience opportunities that focus specifically in children's publishing?
So there are not as many volunteer opportunities, which I think is probably a good thing. So there are internships, paid internships, but less so volunteer roles. And I think we got to a stage in publishing where people would do where work experience, every CV that you got would be like, oh, I did 2 weeks work experience at Penguin and 2 weeks work experience at Random House, and it was people doing lots of kind of free work experience. But there is only a certain section of society that can afford to be in London working for free. And it's not particularly inclusive or diverse or accessible to a lot of people. So I think there are fewer places that do like work experience for that reason, which I think is a good thing. Asking people to work for free is not a way to diversify the industry. But there are definitely like internships. I know Usborne run an internship which pays a living wage, and I don't know, and I think travel to London or accommodation in London. Orion run an online internship, which again is paid. And then there are places like the Spare Room Project and the book trade charity who support people in like going to job interviews, and if they need accommodation to go and to go to London and do job interviews and that kind of thing. So there are definitely paid internships. I can't think of others that spring to mind, but I know pathways into publishing and places like that would potentially kind of what's the word, collate them all together. Actually, if you're on LinkedIn, another freelance publicist that I know, Sally Oliphant, just wrote for Working Publishing Week, just wrote a really, really generous, practical post with tips for getting into publishing, and one of those points was about schemes that are happening. So it's worth look. I've reposted it as well, so it's on my LinkedIn, but it's Sally Oliphant who wrote it, and it's just a really kind of very practical list of tips for people looking to work in publishing. So that's a really good place to start as well, because it's got a few links to different places as well.
Thank you. And finally, in your opinion, what brings children's publishing apart from other types of publishing?
Oh, just the people. I'm completely biased because I've obviously worked in children's the vast majority of my career. I think because it's a relatively small industry and people stay, there's a real sense of community. And people are lovely. You don't get many arseholes working in children's publishing, sorry. So there's the community aspect, but then I guess with children's there's that added feeling of you're all working towards a common goal, which is kind of more important than I'm getting a bit holier than thou, but there's the aspect of you're instilling reading for pleasure in young people, and we're all converts to reading, but to be able to all be working towards that common goal of instilling that love of reading giving that to a kid who's then going to have that for the rest of their life, which will then impact their life chances, because reading for pleasure impacts life chances in such a positive way and is vitally important. So there's that, I feel, as well as it being a really lovely community, there's that added goal and mission that everybody's working towards, which kind of gives a deeper sense of satisfaction as well.
Thank you so much for answering all those questions. I know we've run a little over, so sorry to everyone if you've got anything to go to. But I just want to say a big thank you to you, Liz. It's been incredible talking to you. You've been very,
Thank
very
you.
insightful about children's publishing as
Oh,
well.
well, thank you for asking me, and I hope that it's useful. I know that I do have a tendency to waffle, but I am on Blue Sky and LinkedIn and X. If any, Liz Scott PR. If anybody wants to find me and ask me any more questions, because yeah, no, we've run out of time.
I was just about to ask that as well, because I think there is a few more questions that have crept in that we've not been able to get to. So if it's okay for those people to message you on social media, as you've just said,
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think and my email address is on my website as well, so you can always get hold of me. I'm very happy to answer more questions.
This one wanted a book rec, so might need to be a wide post on that one.
Definitely. And then on an SYP North front, I have put it in the comments, but we are planning our final in-person event of this year whilst we're in these roles. And it's based in York, and it's going to be a book crawl. So the link is in the chat if anyone's interested. It's free to attend, except for if you buy the books. So that's on you, depending on how much you want to buy. So my budget's quite high. But please do come along. That link's in the chat. And I think that's everything. Katie, can you think of anything else to
No,
say?
I think you've covered it all.
Fab. Just thank you all for attending, and sorry we ran a little bit over, and we will send the recording out with a transcript as well. That's what I was meant to say. Just
Amazing.
so you can go over, look at names, anything that you've missed and you want to look over, you can do.